Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. A joint G7 declaration backing Ukraine and promising stronger sanctions on Russia has emerged shortly after midnight Wednesday at this year's summit in France, with President Donald Trump joining other leaders in committing to increased military support, additional air defense systems, and greater pressure on Moscow's war economy. And the announcement comes as Ukraine demonstrates once again its growing long-range strike capabilities deep inside Russia. And joining us now to discuss the latest is Professor Olexiy Haran, Research Director at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Good to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
So let's begin with this declaration, this joint statement of the G7. Off the face of it, I'm looking at it here right now. Strong words, positive words, also with President Trump on board. How does this change? What is your impression of this joint declaration of the G7?
Much better than it was expected. When we are talking about President Trump, that you are unsure what will happen next. And we know that there were differences, let's put it mildly, between United States, Europe, Ukraine. So basically, yes, you are right. The language of the statement is strong. There is joint decision, to continue support to Ukraine, delivery of weapons, including missiles. That's very, very important. There were talks about, providing licenses to Ukraine on producing different weapons, again, including missiles, perhaps including Patriot as well. We know that Poland received such a license. We hope that there would be such a possibility for Ukraine as well. So let's just compare with what happened last year. Last year, President Trump actually didn't wait until the end of the summit, so he left it earlier. As far as I remember, he didn't meet with President Zelensky. So basically now it's different. It's different. Well, I think that there are changes, there are recent changes on the battleground. I think Europe has done, and European Union, by the way, has done huge diplomatic work supporting Ukraine. President Macron himself, he invented this wonderful thing to invite President Trump for a special dinner in the palace in Versailles, devoted to 250th anniversary of United States independence. And I would remind that at that time, 250 years ago, France was a very important ally of the United States in its fight American fight for independence. So Macron is using this possibility. He is inviting Trump for this wonderful dinner in wonderful place. And we know the place of French kings. And for Trump, we know how he likes this kind of things. So yes, he feels good and he can't escape it. So he is staying under the end of the summit, and then he will go to France. These are the positive signs. Again, yes, you see this one of the photos from meetings between Trump and
on that note, let me just jump in there.
So
On the discussion of Trump, I want to get a little bit more on the detail. It's interesting what you're saying. I want to get your view on it, because at the beginning of that statement, it says, united in unwavering support for Ukraine, defending its territorial integrity. So interesting now that the Americans seem to be on board with this. Does that mean that the Americans and Trump now supports Ukraine and that there will be no territorial concessions? Do you read it that way or differently?
Look, first of all, we know how Trump administration pressed Ukraine in so-called negotiations, trilateral negotiations. There were no real negotiations because Putin didn't want it, but Trump pressed Ukraine to accept Russian demands. So it's very good that now it's about territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is a basic principle. We are not, frankly speaking, we need to recognize that at this point, we cannot liberate all the occupied Ukrainian territories by force. So we think, well, for the time being, we are aiming at least at freezing the front line, which would mean that for some time, the territories which are occupied by Russia will stay under Russian control. But Ukraine cannot recognize that this is part of Russia, and in the same way, international community cannot recognize it, because otherwise, it will be like Hitler's occupation of the country, Stalin's occupations of different countries. No, I believe the civilized world cannot recognize it because it's against international law. So that's important. That's why it's important. The territorial integrity is stressed in this statement. Again, we understand that now we cannot reach it, but as a principle, it remains, and we hope that in some time we would be able, to liberate these territories.
Yeah, and also I think this comes at a critical time. You mentioned the front line, freezing it potentially there. And also in the text, it goes on, momentum increasing, deliver of air defense. That's what Zelensky wanted to get. Also, how does that tie in, what we're hearing on reports on the front lines as well, with also what's happening around Konstantinivka? I mean, apparently the Russians are pushing in from all sides hard. So what do we make of this? And how urgent are these deliveries, and what's going to be on the battlefield there and their impact?
Well, first of all, what's happening in Konstantinivka? This is infiltrations of Russians into the city, and but the battle continues. So Russians are not able, to seize it in the face-to-face attack. So they're using these tactics of infiltration, and definitely Russians, they have preponderance in people there. So they're using this tactics, of we call it meat storms. So they're sacrificing their peoples. How can we respond? Yes, we are responding by including these strikes, and these strikes are deeply inside Russia against all oil facilities, oil producing facilities, oil storages, refineries. And Russia has problem now with gasoline basically in most of the regions of Russia and also in the occupied territory. So if you continue this pressure, yes, you see these videos. I believe actually, because now there were strikes nearby the Moscow, 15 kilometers from the Kremlin. There is oil refinery, and Ukrainian side managed to strike it as well. So basically, it means that there would be problem with supply of gasoline to Russian army. Mm-hmm. So, and definitely it would create potentially, it creates already problems for the Russian army and for their offense.
Yeah. And the one that you've said, the recent strike, the Moscow oil refinery, 15 kilometers south of the capital, that's apparently accounts for 40% of Moscow's petrol demand. I think also in diesel it's quite high, so significant. Also speaking of, back to some of the things from the joint declaration, interesting how also solidarity was mentioned with cultural heritage. Now, seeing as what's happened just on Monday with the strike in Kyiv of the monastery there, of what's happened there with the Golden Dome in Lavra, do you think that's connected here, and how, let's say, critical are more air defenses right now, not just for cultural heritage sites, but all across Ukraine?
Definitely, yes. We need the support. We need anti-aircraft missiles. So it's very positive that this is mentioned in the declaration. Again, I have mentioned that there is a possibility to supply more missiles, also licenses. But yes, you are now showing the Lavra. It's not just monastery. Actually, Lavra is a very prestigious, in Orthodox world. Actually, on the territory of former Soviet Union, there are only 4 Lavras, and Lavra in Kyiv is the most ancient and most influential. So, well, I cannot understand why Russia, because Russia is saying, okay, Kyiv, it's so important for us, Christian civilization, and Russia is bombarding the heritage. Actually, they are saying that this is also heritage of former glorious past, and Russia is bombarding it. Just an interesting fact that in 1942, Soviet guerrillas actually destroyed this monastery, the main temple of the monastery, and it was rebuilt. And now Russia is hitting it, trying to destroy again. This is kind of very bad symbolism, showing that what Russia doing is barbarian.
Yeah, and we've heard those comments as well. And as you mentioned, so incredibly important beyond the borders of Ukraine, this Lavra. And I think some of the assessments come out this morning is it'll take at least, I think, 2 years to repair all of that. So I think this is going to be another task of the many things that have to be repaired. I want to ask you also quickly if we can just also go to what Lukashenko has said in Belarus. Now, he says a lot of things, but recently now he's apparently apologized to President Zelensky, saying, I'm sorry if I've offended him. But then he goes on and sort of insults him again in a way and saying that, well, he's young and inexperienced, he's not a military man. So why the change, and what is the subtext here in your mind, if you can just clarify?
As you rightly pointed out, Lukashenko has said very many different things, during his dictatorship. So I don't think that we should trust the words of Lukashenko, what is he thinking in reality. But why Lukashenko, at least now, is kind of maneuvering? I believe because he would like to improve economic situation in Belarus. Russian economic situation is not good right now. Belarusian economic situation is not good right now. So what is important for the dictator to increase export of Belarusian fertilizers, because they are also under sanctions. And actually the only way to export is through Russia, which is very complicated. The direct way is either through Ukraine, which is impossible right now, or through Lithuania or Poland. But now it stopped because of the war and because of the sanctions. So Lukashenko is trying, to play on the Trump's business inclination, to supply these fertilizers to American farmers and to play on that in the electoral campaign in the United States. And we know that there is a kind of improvement of relations between Trump and Lukashenko. So perhaps look at what Lukashenko is trying to do. He is trying, to maneuver here and to say that, oh, I would like to have good relations with Ukraine, but let's lift up sanctions. Let me export Belarusian fertilizers. I think this is part of the plan. Also, this is partly, I think, to soothe Belarusian population. He is saying, oh, Belarus is a peace-loving country, we are not going to be involved in the war. Also, we know that in 2022, Ukraine was bombarded from the Belarusian territory as well. But
right, so there are many things that, I'm sorry to jump in there, Professor. I mean, many elements that I still want to go. Unfortunately, we'll have to conclude there. But thanks so much for all those insights. Much appreciated, Professor Olexiy Haran. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your support of Ukraine, for your coverage of what's going on in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, and thanks for your expertise. And thank you for watching. Stay right here, though. Don't go away, TVP World. There's much more coming up, so bye.